Evangelion started off as simply the first directed project of Hideaki Anno, a 90s anime about mechs and aliens with no promise of success. But with the dozens of iterations which now muddle the series' name, it's clear this low-budget anime became bigger than intended. When revisiting his magnum opus 10 years later with a set of movies, Anno decided to tie every piece of Evangelion media together with a little plot manipulation, resulting in the creation of the Multiverse of Evangelion. This is the story of how this idea came to be, what all came together to form this timeline-spanning narrative that inevitably came to an end with Thrice Upon a Time. I'm once more diving into the world of Eva to make sense of, in detail, the workings of the Evangelion multiverse. We know the universe of Evangelion operates under the idea that all its media creates one cohesive story, from the words of Kaoru within the Rebuild movies. He hints on multiple occasions that Shinji and his interaction on this world line is not their first. Hints that Shinji has always found himself chained by trauma and self-doubt on each world line, that they're bound by fate to always meet one another, and Kaoru bound to remember and find a way to break the cycle of Shinji's suffering. He mentions their names being written in the Book of Life, the writings paired together, resulting in their souls being crossed, always meeting in each version of the Eva story. The constraints on their worlds, the backstories of those around them, are fluid, seeming to change each time we revisit the world, but the fact that these two will encounter one another has always been predetermined. We don't know for sure how many times Kaoru could have lived. We don't know how each time he changed his approach in attempting to alter Shinji's fate in pursuit of a happy ending. But mistakenly, he has assumed that for himself to find happiness, he must bring joy to this boy's life. A relationship of codependency disguised as love. But that's an idea we'll talk about later. It would have first appeared the multiverse itself revolves around Kaoru, he being the only one capable of remembering past iterations of their world in this vicious cycle, always waking from death to the next Evangelion world. But it may just be that the epicenter of the cycle is not Kaoru himself, but the relationship between he and Shinji. While the angel boy may remember the past worlds, Shinji's decision is key to ending the cycle of rebirth. He's just as important to this puzzle as Kaoru. Thus, a different task falls upon his soul, to learn from the suffering of the world's past, move forward into the next life, not with exact memories of the one he left, but a newfound approach carved into his very being, a feeling that this time, he can better navigate the suffering in traumatic situations. Making slight changes over lifetimes eventually will show the proper path. Through human determination and perseverance, he can and will discover more about himself and the heights of possibility. Kaoru is his guide through this experience, with the raw memories of what Shinji failed to do in each iteration. He's able to alter his approach to better serve his role, though at times, as Kaoru too is not perfect, he may choose the incorrect path forward. Fate is not so kind. It will not serve these boys' happiness on a silver platter. They must learn about their pains, learn from their failures, just as everyone else must. Despite Kaoru's earnest attempts to involve himself in Shinji's fate, at the end of the day, Shinji is the only one who can free himself, and in turn the others trapped with him from this cycle of life they've found themselves in. There are parallels of this cycle to the cycle of reincarnation within the Buddhist belief system, though with some slight variations. In traditional samsara, the cycle of rebirth, souls are reborn based on karma, accumulating experiences over lifetimes to eventually achieve nirvana, a break in the cycle, an idea similar to heaven. Now in the Eva multiverse, this nirvana comes in the form of a world liberated from Evas. Without these alien robots, none of the suffering caused by them would exist. Thus, they're liberated from their trauma. Their absence at the end of the series serves as both a way of cutting ties with the world we've become accustomed with, for the sake of giving the characters better lives, as well as a goodbye to the idea of Evangelion and its iterations. A message from Anno that this is the end, there will not be any more. To break free of the samsara cycle of Evangelion, both Shinji and Anno must give up their roles. Shinji as a pilot and Anno as the creator. To move on to what lies next for them, they must say goodbye to these identities, leaving them in their past. For Shinji, realization comes at the culmination of his ultimate self-actualization in Thrice Upon a Time, as does Anno's. After all, he wrote this actualization. He had his own goodbyes to say, his own reasons for departing from the series, and even making these movies in the first place. Vimutti, the release from the burden and freedom from what was weighing on one's soul. In this case, these two didn't arrive at nirvana. They arrived at a new world with fresh possibilities. They may not be free from the suffering of the human experience, but they've liberated themselves from a specific burden of their personal human experience. Evangelions. The parallels to Buddhism continue with Kaoru's position in our story. In Buddhist belief, some enlightened beings, bodhisattvas, retain knowledge of their past lives and choose to remain within the samsara to help others. For Kaoru specifically, on the basis to help Shinji. However, despite his attempts, they always end in failure, making each return more tragic and demotivating. His suffering is that of a being caught on a fence by compassion and personal liberation. His love for Shinji, while pure, keeps him trapped in the cycle just as Buddhist teachings warn. Attachment leads to suffering. He mistakes compassion with sacrifice, insisting that he must be the one to make Shinji happy, instead of allowing Shinji to find that happiness himself. He holds his hand in each lifetime, sacrificing himself each go around, but by choosing to do so, he's inadvertently stunting the boy's growth. It's similar to when children do not learn to practice independence. Shinji begins, whether this is conscious or subconscious, to rely on Kaoru's presence and comfort in harsh times. But no amount of love can prevent Kaoru's fate. He's destined to always leave him through death. And while his kindness does waves to progress Shinji, he also tends to drown in it. It's only when Kaoru realizes stepping back and allowing Shinji to make his own choices that the cycle can finally break. It's not that his role in supporting the boy was hindering, but his overprotection of him was, and his attempts to shield the boy from trauma and pain. He was stunting Shinji's ability to process such grief and suffering, something that is unavoidable in life, and in their case, the lives that await them. The nirvana they eventually arrive to, the world without Evas, isn't a heavenly kingdom. Shinji simply entered a new cycle of living, one much more similar to ours, allowing him a chance for growth on normal grounds. Each character is given this chance to live as we would, and so their paths no longer are tied together. Kaoru is no longer tied to Shinji's happiness. He has the opportunity to search his own soul for what happiness means to him. I was born to meet you, and that became my curse. A curse of compassion that prevented Kaoru from his own pursuit of enlightenment, yet now liberated and freed by the very one he so desperately tried to help. The favor has been returned, and in his new world, he can head down his own path of self-discovery. Maybe that was the entire point of the cycle they found themselves in. Maybe it was to free Kaoru from his feelings just as much as it was about freeing Shinji from his suffering. Either way, it's clear these two sit at the center of the multiverse. Their fates always intertwined, but a question still remains. What exactly populated this universe, and how does each reborn life affect one another? Neon Genesis, End of Evangelion, the original manga, the PS2 Girlfriend of Steel game, Angelic Days, Brazing Project, Anima, Petite Eva. The list of Evangelion media goes on, and we can't be sure what exactly rings out as canon in the multiverse, what Shinji actually experienced before the days of rebuild, because we've never been given any guidelines for how exactly this cycle functions, which means we also can't be for certain of the order in which they occur. But there are ground rules we can establish. We know Neon Genesis, per its root name in Latin being new beginnings, and the fact that it is the source of this entire world-spanning story, that it's obvious it's the first timeline Shinji's soul experienced. Here the boy kills Kaoru, becomes lost in instrumentality, yet eventually reaches an ambiguous happy ending, with him accepting his imperfections and choosing to live for another day. What exactly set them down this rebirth cycle connecting Shinji and Kaoru cannot be certain, but from Kaoru's own words, he had a certain fondness for Shinji that attached his soul to the boy's, and the mysticism of the Evangelion world did the rest of the work, leading to the next life. Comparing Neon Genesis against the End of Eva movie, we know this has to be a separate timeline, as how Shinji acts here and in Genesis are drastically different, which puts the End of Evangelion as the second world line Shinji experiences. We can assume it had the same buildup of Kaoru dying, meaning not much changed between these worlds, giving us all the more reason they'd be closer to each other on a timeline. Shinji in this world experiences the same trauma and suffering in a more volatile way. We cannot be sure as to why, but just as in life, sometimes there are setbacks among the greater journey. It may just be Shinji's soul wasn't ready to accept himself again. We really don't know what happened after the Genesis series ended. We don't know what went on to occur. Maybe accepting himself was only half the battle, the other half destroying any progress we hoped he had made. But that's just the start of the confusion. The third timeline Shinji experiences on his voyage of self-discovery must be the Evangelion manga, which showcases a rift between the pair of bound souls. Kaoru, maybe in realization that his original approach did not change the order of events enough, takes on a more apathetic and manipulating role, donning the identity of a villain, but one that loves Shinji all the same. Maybe it's the stress from suffering, from being reincarnated from death for a third time, with the memories of his past lives. Regardless, his action throughout this series are much more rash, which in the end becomes just another thing for Shinji to overcome. The boy becomes overwhelmed and confused by the mixed signals of Kaoru. Yet we can tell throughout this manga that his approach to trauma and pain has become a tad more mature than his anime selves. He's able to handle the stress, able to overcome and push past instead of falling into despair. Kaoru dies here, not so much as the martyr we're used to seeing him as, but more as a tragic villain. He did some heinous shit, maybe in hopes this drastically different approach would force a different ending. But that's ignoring the fact Shinji is only partially responsible for the events of instrumentality. If anything, he just gets thrown into the mess that is the third impact, and is forced to cope with what that means. Thus, once again it happens, yet this time, the world doesn't turn to dunes with red oceans and crosses of stray Evangelions. Something different does happen. The world rebuilds itself. How long this took, we don't know. But as if setting up what will come in another timeline, Shinji lives life yet again, as do the other cast members, in a world holding relics of the past, of the near impact. A snowy tundra masking the true nature of these obelisks. No one remembers their meaning or use. Evangelions seem to be forgotten. What does that mean? How are we supposed to take this? There's two possibilities from what I can see. What they show us here is a different timeline their souls were born into, or it's the same timeline centuries later, and the characters have found themselves reborn due to the almighty abilities of instrumentality. We can assume time is fluid within the instrumentality state, and Shinji intentionally launched them into the future, where the world has returned to a more normal state, allowing them to live a life not as plagued by despair. We can't really be sure, but then again, when has anything in Evangelion ever been 100% clear? Whether we just saw two timelines in the manga or one, there arises more problems to address. The various spin-off games and manga. The rebuild movies are the capstone of this cycle. It's the final destination. There are no other options. Shinji literally removes Evangelions from existence, so every piece of media that showcases the Gundams must take place before that event. So Anima, Petite, Raising Project, Angelic Days, and Girlfriend of Steel, in whatever order you find appealing, all happen between the manga and rebuild. These worlds come in different shapes and sizes, but for the most part, their Shinji is more closely related to the shift we see in the manga than the one present in the original anime. So after these worlds occur, canon or not, Shinji moves into his final life in the Multiverse of Evangelion. Though I have another wrench to throw into the timeline we just created. Even adding up the anime, the manga, the spin-offs, the games, we have a total of about 8 or 9 rebirths. That seems like a lot, but if we count the coffins that symbolize the amount of times Kaoru has been reborn, there is a total of 37. He had to have died 37 times. The importance is not understanding how he died 37 times, but just recognizing the fact that he did. We know for certain what is likely the first 3 deaths, which leaves 34 up to your imagination, i.e. the spin-offs, manga, and games. And using a little empathy, we can only imagine the weight of the suffering of dying over 30 times would have on the soul. Yet the Kaoru that greets us in Rebuild is nothing like his third lifeline. Maybe he realized that the villainous approach did not break the cycle, and thus chose to pursue a more guiding approach. Though it seemed this wasn't good enough. How many different ways did he attempt to end this cycle? How much torment has he gone through? At some point, he must have come numb to this idea of death, given up hope of ever solving this problem. problem. Yet somehow, even waking upon the moon this time around, he's confident that this time, things will be different. Kaoru, whether he was faced with faltering hope at one point or another, has not given up on Shinji just yet. And that's all the boy needs, a person who believes in him. To end the rebirth cycle, Shinji needs to be ready. But after how we saw him act within the manga, it's hard to think he was not prepared for what comes next. What still weighed on his soul? My guess is others. I don't think it's outlandish to assume Shinji has refused to move on, similar to Kaoru, because he does not wish to leave those he has become close to, trapped within this cycle of suffering. Gendo, Asuka, Rei, Misato. It could be, despite not consciously aware of the cycle of rebirth like Kaoru, his soul subconsciously chose to ride these various lives out until the opportunity arose to save those he was close to. Rebuild offered that possibility, a choice to let go of the world his soul has known for so long. Return the favor to Kaoru for his guidance over these lifetimes. Show his father what it meant to make peace with your past. If Shinji chose to break the cycle before now, it may have only freed himself and possibly Kaoru. But by waiting till now, by experiencing these lifetimes of suffering and torment, he had the opportunity to right all wrongs. The Evangelion technology has always been the source of many problems. By eliminating it, he liberated them of its curse. Asuka got a release from the torment of her obsession to be a pilot and impress her mother, or in the rebuild's case, serve the purpose she was created for. Rei was released of her maternal instincts for Shinji, allowed to walk in the world not as a clone of another human, but as an individual self. Various other characters experience different conclusions, inhabiting various worlds within space-time. I've explained their endings before, so there's no need to do so now. The point stands, Rebuild was the final of the EVA timeline that resulted in the lost souls of the cast being freed from this cycle of pain, guilt, and trauma. It's not difficult to understand why they decided to go the route of connecting all things Evangelion. These movies ring out as closure on the series that even decades after its release are still loved worldwide. This is my 5th video talking about it, and yet I'm sure you'll still want a full analysis of the manga someday. But just like this video, at some point, all things must come to an end. And for Anno, this is what freed him from his own cycle of Evangelion. A symbolic return and departure, a final goodbye to Eva, a thank you to fans, and a weight lifted from his shoulders. Burdening the role of creator for something so loved and having the balls to return to it, knowing that if you slip up, millions of angry fans will detest you, is not easy. But without the rebuilds, you wouldn't have this video explaining to you how the hell their multiverse works. Maybe it's shrewd, loosely put together, hard to comprehend at first. But that's always been what Evangelion is. From the days of Neon Genesis accidentally calling Lilith by the wrong name, or the 3rd Rebuild movie being nothing like they said it would be. The series has always persevered through hardship and errors, and as a result, we have a beautifully human creation that embraces its faults. Dozens of variations of the same story, each unique in their own right. Not everything has to be a perfectly sound argument. Like life, there's a lot of decisions one must make with minimal understanding. Jumping into the fray and asking questions later. Having a set of values and morals that you've defined for yourself allows you to act without fear, knowing that as long as you are true to who you want to be, things may just work out alright. Shinji learned that lesson over lifetimes, and it may take you lifetimes to figure it out fully for yourself. But that idea never stopped him from making progress in each and every timeline. However little it may be, those changes make ripples that turn into waves. So whatever cycle you find yourself in, one day, through perseverance and choice, you may just be able to break free.